Hello, this is an update for the Deathblow Kick Barbarian build guide that I made a little while back. There's been a few changes to the build just based on my own testing. Then there was also this big Diablo 4 patch that happened yesterday, which this might be one of, if not the most buffed builds by that patch. Most of the changes are pretty minor, but this build in particular got buffed in multiple different areas, and it definitely feels more consistent and reliable to play, and it's the kind of things that most other builds aren't really using. So I think this one has actually gotten quite a bit of a glow up, and I already think it was pretty decent before. So what's changed for it? The Iron Skin aspect, just defensively, gives us a little bit more damage reduction now, which is always nice. I think survivability is probably the build's biggest weakness. Then the Deathblow unique Overkill, it got a buff to the damage of the Shockwave, which gives us more consistent AoE damage, helps us a little bit more when clearing the screens with one hit instead of two. Then the most important change by far is that Kick got 4 seconds removed off of the cooldown, and this is super important for this build in multiple ways. Kick is extremely pivotal to how the build works, because it enables our mobility, because every time we hit something with Kick, it resets our leap cooldown, and it also enables our damage, because every time we're dumping our Fury with Kick, we're getting those triple damage death blows, and that's how we're able to fairly consistently one-shot elites and 1 to 2 shot bosses. So having Kick on a shorter cooldown definitely feels really good. It's pretty much always available whenever I want to use it, and it's just gone a long way to making the build feel quite a bit better to play. For Iron Maelstrom, it got buffed quite a lot, and so I've actually swapped Wrath of the Berserker out in favor of putting Iron Maelstrom in. And so far, it feels really good to me. Iron Maelstrom's single target damage is pretty bad, and we definitely lose single target damage by not having Wrath of the Berserker and the stacking damage buff that gets based off of Fury Spent. But I don't think single target damage is really that important in general, and what Iron Maelstrom does do is a very reliable and consistent just press this button and delete the entire screen, which you can see it happen right there. I mean, it one-shots most elites. It just doesn't really do much of anything against bosses or the Butcher like you saw earlier. But it is on a very short cooldown, since this is a walking arsenal build. We're constantly lowering the cooldown of it, because its cooldown gets lowered every time you use a skill with a different weapon. And as long as you're rotating between your lunging strike, and death blows, it gets down to like a 15 to 20 second cooldown. And it's just very fun to play with. It looks super cool. And it's great. So those are the biggest changes from the patch. As far as my own testing goes, we moved Disobedience onto the chest, giving us that stacking armor. I think that's more important than what I had on there before. If you need even more survivability than that, you can actually put Disobedience on the neck over the Edgemasters aspect, and instead put the aspect of Might on your chest, which gives you damage reduction every time you basic attack, which, since we lunging strike fairly often, that'll pretty much always be up, and Disobedience on the neck is probably the single most powerful combination of slot plus aspect to give you more defense. That'll probably be necessary later on when it comes time to actually try and push things with this build, but right now, for leveling and speed farming, I like having the Edge Masters for more consistent deathblow damage and bigger kicks. The other big change is I've removed Berserk Ripping from the weapons and replaced it with aspect of the Brawler, which is the one that gives you an explosion anytime an enemy damaged by Kick dies. Berserk Ripping is just not that important. It's a really nice damage multiplier, particularly for single target, but like I said before, I don't think single target really matters that much in this game unless you're doing Lilith. And there's other ways to get the bleed synergies. So ideally, you're using a two-handed sword in your two-handed slashing weapon slot, and so every time you're using that, just the passive technique from using a two-handed sword gives you the bleed to activate your bleed synergies. Alternatively, if you don't have a two-handed sword, just use the two-handed sword technique to then get the bleed that way. Either one is really fine, but we don't need Berserk Ripping to apply the bleeds, and I think the Brawler aspect is actually really good, especially for dungeons like this one, where there's a bunch of little mobs. If you get a Kick off into a pack of these little things, it's a pretty big explosion, and the whole screen just dies. Not the whole screen, but everything in that area around the Kick dies. And it also just looks really cool. I love the explosion. So I've swapped Berserk Ripping out for that. And there's also been some changes to the Paragon boards and stuff like that. So I've linked the updated planner down in the description, so you can just take a look at that to see the updated aspects, updated skill tree, and the Paragon boards. But that's pretty much it. I think the build, it feels really good for me right now. Like, this dungeon is 5 levels above me. My weapon is not that good, and I'm still just very quickly going through it and killing bosses and the butcher in 1 to 2 hits, and deleting elite packs and entire screens with Iron Maelstrom. It's just a lot of fun to play. You're leaping all the time. You have the kick explosions happening all the time. It's pretty great. So definitely give it a try. Check out that build planner in the description, and thanks for watching.